is now 1 o'clock. So we're going to start our roundtable. We want to encourage you guys to answer some of the polls that we're going to be having when we start. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the Q&A button in your Zoom interface here down at the bottom, okay? And we will try to include those as we go through our discussion for today. And then any questions that we don't address during the discussion, we'll try to save some time at the end of the roundtable to answer those questions. But I want to encourage you guys to go ahead and put them in whenever they pop in your head during the session here. All right. So let me introduce myself. I'm Sean Norris. I'm a healthcare interpreter. I'm a coordinator of language services at University of Florida Health in St. John's. I'm really excited to have this wonderful panel today. And the discussion is creating safe and inclusive learning environments with technologies, how machine translation and AI can support language access in schools. So really cool topic. And this is brought to us by Effective. We thank them for providing this roundtable. And we also thank our panelists here today. And I believe we are going to, before we start and introduce everyone here on the panel, I think we have some polls that we would like to launch just to get a sense of who's here, who's in attendance, and we want to be able to make sure we provide the information that you guys need as well. We'll give that a few more seconds for you guys to fill out that poll. Okay. And I believe, do we have another poll question that we were going to launch? Or was it just the one? Forgive me for not recalling at the start.
No, I think just this
just
one,
the one.
I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
All
the other one at the end of the roundtable.
At the end,
yeah,
if we have time. Yep. Okay, great. And thank you guys for answering that poll. Are we able to publish that now? There we go. Thank you. And it seems like 70% of the audience are language access coordinators or program managers. Some are language service providers, representatives, and there's some others that are have a different role that's not listed there. So that's great. Thank you guys so much for answering that poll. I'd like to introduce our panel here. So we're going to have them introduce themselves, and we'll start with Marifer, if you don't mind, and then we'll go to Cleburne. Okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marifer Sager. I am the Director of Strategic Communications and Public Affairs at Multnomah Education Service District, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to Effective and everybody else, the other panelists as well.
Thank you. And I believe, I'm sorry, it was Kleber, right?
Yes, thanks, Sean. Yes, hello, everyone, and welcome. Excited to be here. As mentioned, my name is Kleber Palma. I'm the Executive Director of the Office for Language Access in the New York City Department of Education.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Stefan.
Yeah, and thank you, Sean. Hi, everybody. My name is Stefan Koradaev. I'm CTO of Effective, hosting this panel, not myself, but Effective. And I oversee optimization and technology, including machine translation at Effective. Thank you.
All right, great. So really excited to hear what our panelists have to say. So we have some great questions. And again, just a reminder to those of you who are just joining us, please feel free to put any questions that pop in your head during our discussion, or if you have any that you already have in mind now, feel free to put them in the Q&A session. We'll include them during our discussion or at the end, if possible, okay? All right. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. Let's start off with the first question that we have. What are the key challenges you faced in creating safe and inclusive learning environments on different levels, such as for students and parents with language barriers? And maybe we want to start with Cleaver.
Sure, yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think the list of challenges could be endless depending on you know, what we're discussing here. But we'll focus in on one that connects to the topic that we're discussing today. And I think just generally, one of the challenges when advocating for language access in school systems or in most settings is educating folks and having folks understand about the profession itself, what the expectations should be, and also to add to that, also to begin to incorporate the technology and how to do so. And that's an educational process in general. So we start with first letting folks know, you know, the difference between translation and interpretation. Let's start at the basic levels, and then what it means to be bilingual or fluent. And these are just basic elements, but that takes time for a lot of folks to understand those pieces. And then to go from there to just the beyond the variances of fluency or quality, the timing and the scheduling that's involved, and then you throw in technology on top. So the challenge, to summarize, is just constant education, right? And that's just an ongoing effort.
I agree with Cleaver. I think that those are some of the challenges. I would like to take a step back and say that even further is just for parents to understand that they have the right to request an interpreter or a translation. So for educators to know, so part of that, the education that needs to happen around language access and inform parents of that right, it's critical for the success of language access.
Thank you. Stefan, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I'm on the LSP side, right? So probably a little more on the other side of this the spectrum. But I can say that technology plays a huge role in making the environment more inclusive, right? Especially nowadays with all the progress that's been achieved over the last years. And so sometimes it comes down to the question if can we provide a human-based service, right? Or no service at all? Or can we provide machine translation based or AI based service? So is it better than nothing at all, right? And I think in many, with all the caveats which are necessary in this case, I think in many cases the answer is yes. Technology helps you build a more inclusive and welcoming environment, especially for people who cannot be served using more traditional workflows just because they are too hard to implement in this environment.
Thank you. I would like to go back to what Marifer had mentioned about educating the parents about their rights. I know that's one I know within our system we have to really educate that hey, the interpreters are here, we're not going to charge you for them. It's a right for you to have. They're professionals. They're not related to you in any way. They're not going to tell anybody anything. But it is very interesting that for me, being a sign language interpreter and having deaf family, I'm used to having interpreters around. So it was a very different for me to kind of experience that with some of the groups that we deal with who speak other languages, and educating them like, no, this is your right to have an interpreter. We want you involved. We care about your opinions, your feelings, and what more important place than an education, right? Making sure parents understand what their kids are learning. Are there other challenges that you guys are facing when you're trying to make sure everyone has language access?
So tapping onto that, so yes, that is critical for parents to understand that it's the right and that it's free. It's very important, because once we started communicating with parents will be still thinking like, yeah, but I don't have money to pay for this. The moment that we say this is free for you, then everybody start requesting interpreters, which is great. Among other challenges, just also following up with what Stefan was saying, we have the situation of the languages of lesser diffusion, right? And how do we address them when we cannot find an interpreter in place? And absolutely, technology is better than nothing, because at least there will be some communication. But still a human will be better. But also identifying those languages, right? Like I remember 7, 8 years ago, people will tell me, we need a Mayan interpreter. And suddenly all the Mayan interpreters weren't good enough. And to me, that was a puzzle, because I get it that maybe there was 1 or 2 that weren't great, but couldn't imagine why everybody. And the reason was the teachers were making the assumption that because the person came from Guatemala, it was automatically Maya, when in reality was a subvariant of the language. So with technology, we were able to identify over the phone what were those languages, and started to serve people in the correct language.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to the parent piece, which is really important to not only let folks know about their right, but that then leads to things as to how do I communicate that message to them? What avenues are accessible? How can they then request the service? So what the message encompasses, where to go, where to give them direction. And then to the next level, what should they expect once they do get the services, right? There's a lot of, you speak my language. What do you think I should do about this? Conversations going on the side. So yeah, it's definitely, letting folks know their rights, definitely step 1, but there are additional steps beyond that we can start thinking about as well. That are challenges, but they can be overcome.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So I know we touched a little bit on technology. So that lines up with our next question. Are you using machine translation and artificial intelligence technologies or other technologies to address the language barriers in your school systems? If so, how do you use those technologies? How do you feel about the results? Are you satisfied with those results, or any wishes, any things that you could change?
I can go first. This is a tricky question for me, because as someone that had worked as a translator and a localizer, I can tell you the answer is yes. I have used machine translation and other tools, technological tools that exist, because I know how to post-edit as well. Should I recommend to someone that doesn't speak other language to just run with machine translation? The answer is no, right? Or it depends the context. So it's a tricky question. What I will say is, in education, we need to be careful about how we use technology, and as people making those decisions, we need to know very well the different segments of the subjects that we have. So we need to make sure that we are compliant with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and all the executive orders from 2000 and most recent 2023. We need to make sure that we are compliant with ADA, with IDEA for special education, with FERPA for privacy of students' privacy and confidentiality of materials. So within that context, I will say that, for instance, a machine translation or assisted technologies can help us with big bodies of documentation that need to be translated, like curriculums. So whenever we're dealing with documentation that will be in front of the students, that can be done through machine translation, because it's cost effective, because it's the time is faster, because it will create glossaries and will be consistent, and we have good post editors at the other end, I would say by all means. But however, when we are dealing with special education materials, I would say always a human translator will be better, or on the other side, we can redact those documents before they go into the machine translation for languages of lesser diffusion. So you need to know the different aspects and bodies of the work.
I'll add that. Yeah, I'll add that as a school system, 100% machine translation is being used in various levels of our schools, whether it be through parent communication apps, which have embedded in them translation tools out of our control. So yes, it is being used, but as the office responsible for language access and translation interpretation services with a in-house staff, we do not use machine translation because we have, as Marifer mentioned, I mean, you have human translators. What we do use, just to introduce a new piece of technology for some folks perhaps, is translation memory software, which is slightly different, which allows us to create allows us to recycle human-based translations. To give you just a quick summary of what that sounds like, and that builds and builds, and then that human still has a major role in implementing or choosing what translations to use. That we have found very successful to increase our efficiency, productivity, consistency, continuity. And for those folks who don't have in-house staff, it's something you may want to inquire with your providers or vendors to make use of that tool to ensure those same capabilities, and also some cost savings involved as well. So something to look into for folks if they have a partnership with a vendor.
I appreciate that. And for those who are not as familiar with the machine translation, they might automatically think of ChatGPT because that has been so front of mind this past year with the advent of AI as we know it today. Stefan, could you kind of elaborate a little bit more about what we mean by machine translation and how it's slightly different, and how long have we been using that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it can be, well, it's not necessarily different from ChatGPT because ChatGPT also offers translation capabilities, and they are pretty good, in fact. So, but they're not kind of exceeding what had been known in the industry by the ChatGPT is not a new technology, it's just a new application, a kind of more consumer-oriented application of the same technology. And speaking of machine translation, again, it's and Marifer covered it perfectly. I mean, it all starts with your ability to kind of manage your work, right, and to evaluate your situation. So this is a prerequisite for any kind of whatever you do, right? So whatever you do, you need to start there. But in terms of machine translation, I think that there's always been a lot of hype around machine translation, but I would say up to maybe 2017 or so, when transformers were introduced and the new technology it emerged. This hype was mostly from the so it kind of like from the vendors. So they tried to onboard more people on their technology, and they tried to persuade everybody that yes, the technology was good enough. Whereas in fact, in many cases, it wasn't. Even though again, it's nuanced, and for some applications, machine translation had been very good even in the early 2000s. But the general this seismic shift that happened around 2017, right, and since then it's been accelerating, is that yes, machine translation now, especially for languages, more popular languages, right? So where you have more text to train your models on. So it's now really good for many applications. Again, so these caveats they are needed on every step of this journey, because yes, it does work for some materials. It doesn't work as well for other materials, right? You still have a lot of technical hurdles, like if you have, I don't know, PDFs, you need to recognize them into something that your model would understand better. So like Word document or presentation or whatever it is. So a lot of work around it, right? But I would say machine translation now is like maybe, I don't know, cars in the 1950s or so, right? So I mean, back then in the 1920s, for example, you still could pretend that there are no cars around. Like you might come across as a bit eccentric, right? But you can go by foot or ride a bicycle. But by the 50s, I think if you would say that no, I don't use cars, I don't want to use cars, it would be like kind of, you know, not something that people would be they would stop looking at you as a just normal person. So it's kind of, you're in the world of your own. So I think this is the same now with machine translation. So you don't have to use it all the time, right? But it's something that you just can't ignore it anymore, and it wouldn't be wise to ignore it. Be it ChatGPT or Google or Amazon, doesn't really matter, because it's a lot of variety there. So it's a thriving industry with a lot of players, and it doesn't limit in any way to Google Translate or ChatGPT. So you have dozens of vendors actually in this space, which some of them are better for some applications, others for others. but you can't just ignore it, right? And again, going back to this car analogy, the very fact that you can drive a car doesn't mean that there are no taxis, right? And that there are no other, or no public transportation or whatever, because for some reason, again, machine translation is something that is readily available in your web browser for any user to use, right? But shall you use it? Well, it depends, right? If you're a corporate user, and again, Marifer mentioned, FERPA mentioned all these regulations that are in place. You just can't use these publicly available services, because in that case, you transfer all your materials, all your content to whatever service you're using, and this is in their agreement with you. So you need a commercially protected account. You need to know how to manage this account, right? Let alone the hurdle of being able to process a lot of documents at once, right? So if you're an individual user, you just have an email that you need to translate into Vietnamese, for example, right? You just copy paste it into your web browser, and then you put it back in your mail client, you send it out. But if it's a more complex document, thousands of pages, you can't possibly do that yourself, right? So you still need someone to do that for you, right? To prepare these documents, to upload them, et cetera, et cetera. So it's also a very important aspect of this. And again, going back to the regulation, so we're saying that the regulation is there, so we need to be very careful with machine translation. Yes, but first, maybe this is yet another area where technology can come in very handy, because, for example, all the regulation, it can be titled differently or describe various aspects of all these, but in the center of this is the protection of personal information, right? Personal data. So for example, if we don't want anybody to have access to students' names or their scores, right? Or if it's healthcare diagnosis or whatever it is. So one way of going about it is to anonymize these documents before you translate them, right? So just change and replacing, like instead of Stefan Korotayev, it would be like patient 1 or student 1, right? And instead of Sean Norris, it would be student 2. And this way, nobody would know who it is. And then at the final step of the translation, these placeholders could be reverted back to their original name. So just one example of how technology can be used to increase your compliance, not the other way around, right? And the other very important part of it is that, yes, we say that human translation is better, possibly, right? But what does human translation mean in our these days, right? So it's another question, because if you have a closely knit, very small in-house group of translators, and of course you trust any of them, and you can control to a degree their environment, where they work, what they can use, what kind of tool set they can use. But as soon as we go to a larger scale and we send these materials out to your LSP partner or to your freelance contractors or whoever they are, how can it control what they do, right? And you're thinking that you're using human translation, you're paying more for it, right? The turnaround time is longer, but when you start analyzing what you're getting back from them, what they're submitting, you might be very surprised to learn that in many cases it's going to be well, basically the very same machine translation, because the technology is known to everybody, right? And we're talking about how difficult it is to use it as at the corporate level. I mean, just the basic applications of it, like your web browser, but it's no problem for an individual translator to use it, right? And they started using it a long time ago. So it's yet another aspect. So if you want to control your program, if you want to manage it properly, you need to have these tools that would allow you to differentiate between truly human translation, right, and just something that is passed over as human, whereas in fact it's just machine translated text with little variation. So
thank you.
These are some of the considerations, yeah, that you need to take into account.
Thank you,
Sean, I would like to do a little bit of a follow-up.
Of course.
On what Stefan had to say. I think that that is what I was saying, like the secret is to know the body of the work, because it could be as someone that manages the work that you make the decision, okay, this doesn't have anything to do with any of the regulations that we have in place. So yes, it can go and can be done by a machine translation, by a team of translators, whatever the approach of the companies may have, and you can develop those contracts also with all those caveats, including all those regulations and know when to use them. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I mean, we're talking a lot about machine translation and AI. I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, but how do we ensure, or how do you ensure the accuracy and reliability of these translations, right? I mean, I think we've all seen different versions of translations that did not have the human touch to them. And a lot of it is pretty good. And then there are some that you're like, wow, I kind of scratch my head at that. So how do you make sure that it's reliable and accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a very challenging question. First of all, because I think that, and I think Stefan, you kind of inferred this a little bit. There are a variety of tools out there that exist, and there may be different levels of performance with those tools. And I think there are also concerns about how well they do depending on the language that's selected as well. So the language variation could also be another factor. So in terms of ensuring accuracy and reliability, I think that some of us have echoed here, having a human element involved at some capacity. Post editing, I think, was the term that was used at some point. I think that is part of the process if you really want to ensure accuracy and reliability in these translations. But other than that, I'll defer to the rest of the group here on any other suggestions you may have.
On my end, I really think that you need to surround yourself by a team that speak the languages that you most frequently translate into. Make sure that they have the training that will make the best out of their skills. And so regardless of the approach that you take to translate the body of work, they can help you, whether it's they are translating firsthand, they are post-editing, or they are just doing quality reviews, that you have the best product, regardless of the approach that you take.
Yeah, I can only agree with that. So, and these are post-editing components, so it's often referred to as human in the loop, right? So it can be post-editing or some other kinds of involvement, but yes, it's safe to say that nobody would tell you that machine translation, as is the raw machine output, is suitable for very many applications where the results, I mean, it is suitable for some applications, right? So for some documents that nobody would ever read, so for example, right? But and we all know that there are, I mean, it's a significant part of what's being translated in the world every day, right? So let's be just honest about it. So something that will just go in the box and nobody will ever see it. But and it's also very good for some repetitive tasks when your model is trained. So, and the training is another aspect of it, right? So when you try just using a vanilla machine translation engine like Google Translate, it comes pre-trained, so you can't basically do much with it. So you take it or leave it. So and again, it's probably very good for many applications, or at least decent. But if you want to really make progress with your program, you need to train your model either yourself or using your partners. Because what it does, so especially if you have some kind of repetitive tasks, so IEPs, right, or something like that. So documents that are repetitive in nature with very similar content, and you can, training is just teaching your model. So showing this model a lot of similar text, similar documents, and that allows this model to become better. Again, if you know how to do that, and as model getting better and better, you're getting better and better results as the output. So, and again, this decreases the amount of time and effort that you need to your human need to input into this work. So your post-editing stage becomes shorter and probably cheaper, right? And with that, so again, another important consideration. So so yeah, you need to manage. I think Marifer said it best. So you need to manage, and if you know how to manage, then good things will come to you.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add to this? No? Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So what would be some best practices for school systems, school districts to, if they're looking at machine translation and AI, if they're not using it currently and they want to use it, what are some best practices that they could implement to support the language access program maybe they don't even have a language access program and they're trying to develop one. What advice would you have for them in using this technology?
Sorry, Clever, would you go first?
Sure, sure. So I think outside of the processes that we've been talking about here to make sure we have pieces in place to make this work, I think it's also important to take a look at what happens outside of the process of using machine translation. And some of those best practices obviously is to disclose to the recipients or to the families or parents the source of the translation, and making it very clear that this document was produced by X or Y or a person or a tool. I think that's really important to let folks know in case there are any issues that get through. Offering families alternatives if possible. I mean, this is an ideal situation, right? Other alternatives. I mean, we can use a tool to translate a language that none of us speak, and it looks like that language and it feels like that language, but it may be complete gibberish because we don't speak that language and we don't have anybody to run it by to confirm that it's okay. So disclosing that there was a tool that was used, perhaps offering alternatives, maybe even soliciting feedback at some point if we want to get to that level of engaging our families. And then on the other end of things internally is really training staff. And I think we kind of touched on this as well, is making sure that folks understand when to use these tools, whether there's sensitive or PII data that should or should not be processed through these tools. And also whether or not the text to be translated is plain language, plain English. Is it simple language? Is it complex language? So I think just education, going back to the other piece I talked about earlier, is really just training and educating folks on when to use it, and how to use it, and what additional steps to take when using these tools are some of the best practices.
Those are all really great points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marifer?
Here are some considerations. As I was saying, there is work within a school district that it's perfectly appropriate to send through machine translation with post editors. So you need to understand what can go to that route, what needs exclusively human translators, what can use a combination of memories and human translators, etc. So that is important to have someone in making a decision position that understand the different aspects of the work of the broad school district. That same person we were talking about plain language and transcreation. In the case specifically for transcreation, you need to know also how to do it and how to turn it into other languages for the work to make sense. And I will, in that sense, will be mostly outreach work and that kind of work. The other thing that I will say that has to do with this is what is the budget for the project, right? You may really want humans to do it, but humans may be really expensive for a specific project. And then you will do those screenings of, how long this product will live, how many people will read it, how important really it is. And with all those filters, you can make the decision that if the budget is tight, maybe the route is to go machine translation plus post-editing. And what is the timeline, right? Sometimes you have these huge projects that come. I used to get those. Friday at 5:30. We need this for Monday at 7.
Yeah, familiar
We love
nightmare.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we will have to look at what were our options. And depending on the language, right? So we also need to look at the pairings. We had, I had a team where some of them were fantastic, and in pairs will be able to tackle a big project with a short notice. But there are languages for which we didn't, and so we needed to reach out to our partners in the big companies and say, hey, we need your help with this. Look at the type of content. I cannot say that enough. Really making sure that there is not content within what you're doing that will violate any of the laws that you need to follow. And if you're absolutely sure and clear that you are not, then move forward. And the time of the translation, how long it will live. There are translations that are just for a meeting and then no one else ever again will look at them. So, timeline also is important. I will say anything that will make it into a website need to be well translated.
Yes, because then everyone can see it.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, so there are nuances to it as well. So, for example, there are some more technical sections on your website, right? The terms and conditions, and all that legalese is very well handled by machine translation in most cases. Not for all languages, but at least for some of them. So, yeah, again, you need to be able to differentiate between the, and I think Marifer touched on a very important side of it. So, on top of machine translation being cheaper and faster in most cases, right? So it's also more predictable in terms, it's more manageable, right? So it's easier to manage your machine translation project because you're not dependent on all those maybe scores of interpreters or translators, sorry, in this case, who are, well, there is no problem of deadline, right? So there is still this post-editing stage, right, where you still need your human resources, and it comes with the very same set of problems. But at least you know that the bulk of work will be completed by certain. So even if it's a huge project, it might not be like minutes, but it's going to be hours. But it's going to be hours, not days or weeks, right? And then well, barring any serious force majeure, like your server goes down. But in most cases, your machine translation will be ready when you know when you expect it, and nothing's going to happen. And you can take it from there and complete the project and go through all the remaining steps. But it's much more predictable and manageable in many ways.
Thank you. Kleber, did you have anything to add?
No, I'm good. Thanks, Sean.
Okay. Maybe I would like to ask Kleber and Marifer then. We've talked about understanding which documents should go through the hands and eyes of a translator, a human translator. Could you provide us, those of us here in attendance, some concrete examples of that? I know we talked about privacy concerns, so things that contain student or family information or personal identifiable information, PII, and making sure that's not present. But what are some other documents that we need to make sure isn't necessarily routed through machine translation or is under the guidance of a human translator who is using machine translation?
Just to clarify, as I say, regardless of the route that you take, at one point you need a human, whether it's at the front doing the work or at the end of the machine doing the work, or when you receive the work from the LSPs, you need to have reviewers to make sure that what Stefan was saying, right? Like maybe I don't speak the language and they are telling, and it looks like Russian, must be Russian, right? So, but we need to have someone that actually can read it and can tell us, yes, they are following the proper syntax, the proper structure of the language, etc. So that is important. We had some instances where people will just run it through Google Translate, send it to us. And in Russian in particular is one of those languages where following the English syntax does not make sense because it has its own way of being written. So while the translation was a translation word by word, it didn't make sense in the whole context of the message that we were trying to send, right? So that is why I'm saying it is important to have a human element at some point of the continuum. Just going back to the conversation of, we have now some technologies that send messages to parents that automatically translate, right? So school districts, I think it was Kleber who mentioned that is happening. We know teachers are just using, Canva or whatever tools they use these days and just sending a message. And sometimes if you see the messages even in Spanish, I mean, just because you know Spanish and you're figuring out what the teacher is trying to tell you something, you can read it and understand, but the message is not written correctly. So for those that adore languages and want to cultivate the proper way of writing it, they are going to tell you that this is awful. It is true that it's closer to understanding what the message is, but I just question what is doing to the language in general as students are learning, right, to write in those other languages. So I have a daughter in age of school learning 2 languages, and I know that she can speak proper Spanish, but also she can do machine translation. She does it for fun, right? Like, so your question. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, to get to the types of documents in terms of what should go this route and what should go that route, we always think about those documents that are much more student specific oriented or family specific because they have tailored information for a child or a family. Those in general are not the prime candidates for machine translation, I would say. And I wouldn't say that because of the fact that they have medical terminology or that type of stuff. That's not the reason why, because that stuff the machine translation can pick up. I think most likely it's because the more you have a human who may not be an author or a great writer and begins to create English content in abbreviations, so short sentences, poorly written English, it may make it a little more difficult for these tools to pick up and actually translate appropriately. And that's the reason why. The other thing that comes to mind, for example, primarily special education documents come to mind a lot, where there's a lot of, I guess, medical terminology. Again, I don't think that's the reason why you shouldn't use machine translation. I think it's because of the author behind it and also the PII information in those documents, right? But also there's in classroom or instructional techniques that teachers know the lingo and they know when they say I'm not a teacher, so I couldn't tell you, I can't think of one right now, but there are in classroom techniques and strategies used for students that requires a human to decipher that piece to understand what exactly they're trying to model for the child and the student or in the classroom, and to get the right message across for the family. So I would think that those types of documents, I think, would cause a little more pause or just a little more thinking through before going through the machine translation route, as opposed to a general flyer inviting a family to a bake sale on Friday to from 6 to 9 in the auditorium. That's pretty much straightforward and less text. So
I think that Cleaver is making a very good point. There are, particularly when you are dealing with dual language materials, things that make perfect sense when you are teaching math or English language as examples that make sense in the English language, that when you are translating them, you need to have someone that will understand what is exactly the equivalent. So I will say in those cases, you not only need a post editor for the work, but also someone with the knowledge, the technical knowledge, because otherwise, like, I will never be able to translate anything in math just because I'm terrible in any language in math. So
yeah, I appreciate your honesty there.
Yeah, this need for experts will always remain, I think, in any field. So it doesn't depend on the technology. It's but by the way, we are I think the term language access was mentioned by Sean at some point, and I think it's important to know that we've been talking mostly about translation, right? Written translation for those who don't know that for some reason. So and language access, mostly for most people, when we talk about language access, more about interpretation, right? Oral translation. So, and of course, in the realm of interpretation, AI is it's a much harder thing to do, right? And a lot of stuff going on in this field as well. I'm pretty sure that we'll see a lot of interesting developments in the coming years. But still, being able to provide an AI interpreter, right, who would be able to interpret in real time, even at the level of quality which we're accustomed now to in translation, right? It's more of a utopia at this point because there are too many variables, too many noise, right? Too many things that you need to account for, and just the pure quality of it will not satisfy your customers. So this is also important to delineate. That being said, it's not limited to machine translation. So, for example, multimedia, right? So again, machine translation can be somewhere at the foundation of when you want to translate, for example, your instructions. Maybe you have some video materials, right? Learning materials, and some of them are can be very well handled by AI. So you can go for subtitles, for example, as your minimum option. But if you want it to be voiced, right? So you need to have a voice in a different language. What it used to mean was that you had to go ahead and find some actors, right? And you have to work with some provider. It's always very expensive. So because it goes by your billed hourly, and it's not if you have a extensive course, for example, e-learning course, whatever it is, it's usually people wouldn't have budget for that. But now with speech synthesis, right, with avatars and stuff like that, it's much cheaper, much faster. And again, it comes with some compromises. But if it's a suitable material, if it's monotonous enough, right, so not much in a way with emotion, right, so it's like not a movie, but maybe something that like some instructions, right, health and safety, whatever it is, it can be very well handled by AI. So it's just another application of the technology that exists today.
Right. Yeah, and I go ahead.
What I
No,
look
go ahead.
forward from AI developers is for them to understand, particularly those that are interested in working in education, is for them to understand the requirements and the laws and develop products that can meet those needs. Because I really believe that in many cases, you're right, Stefan, the use of technology will equalize the access. So when we talk about language access, we're talking about translation and interpretation both, and the broad access that people will have to understanding and having meaningful understanding of what is happening in the education of their students, and therefore supporting student outcomes that ultimately is the goal of education. So I look forward to the day when we have ethics in place, when they can follow, not that there is not ethics, just to be clear, but I'm saying ethics that will follow the requirements of the laws that we have in place.
Thank you. Yeah. I think this technology, if it can continue to advance on the pace it's at, I think it might help some of the other areas that are more rural and have less resources afforded to them. Like many of us here, we're in probably a little bit more populous areas. We have a little bit more resources that are afforded to us. But I think about some areas where the closest sign language interpreter is 3 hours away because they live out further out in the country. That became very challenging for them. So having some sort of technology to help bridge that gap to make access a little bit more ubiquitous would be very nice. With all the caveats included, though.
Right. Sign
We do
languages
have
are notoriously difficult for AI. Yeah. So it's
yes,
just
yes.
as an aside. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when you start introducing a third dimension instead of word, just words, it can be quite challenging. So we have a quick question. Do you use any tools in order to find out if machine translation was involved in the translation process? So I guess auditing something that you've received and like, did they use machine translation? Do you guys use any tools to see if they did? If there's any out there?
Yeah, well, I can take this. So yeah, so I think for any LSP in this era, it's paramount to have something like that. Yes, we do have tools like that. So it's kind of a dashboard which monitors our current projects and just statistically compares what's being translated in our CAT tools. CAT tools is it translation tools with the output of the most popular translation engines. So yeah, and so we usually we are able to spot it pretty quickly. And I can say that over the several last years, I think we've converted dozens of translators. So it's not necessarily that you have to punish them for what they're doing, but you need to have a conversation with them to better understand why they do that. And in many cases, people wouldn't even understand because it's become so ubiquitous, right? And so natural to use it that they would just tell you, no, I don't use machine translation. But what they mean by that is that they don't submit machine translation unchanged, but they just post-edit it, in fact, right? But for them, it's not using machine translation. For them, machine translation is something that they wouldn't work on. But as a first step to create a draft of translation, it's so natural for them that they wouldn't even understand when you ask them what they did with the text. Of course, I use machine translation. What else could I do? So yeah, it's a good question and a very important monitoring thing that you need to do.
Thank you.
Besides that, what I started doing is just random audits. And for that, I will use just community members. So we all know of a big company that had launched a campaign in a country and it didn't go well. And that is because they didn't have the final users looking at the product and giving feedback. So randomly, I will select like a piece of work of each one of the vendors and translators and share it with a specific group and then get the feedback. And, you know, sometimes everything will point out to one specific, and I will have a conversation with those and continue reviewing until either we were obtaining the output that we were looking for or we terminated the relationship.
Thank you. Cleavage, did you want to add to that?
No, I'm really interested in Stefan's dashboard and tool. I love to talk to you about that some other time, but I have nothing to add at this point now.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Yeah.
So someone made a comment about disciplinary reports, incident reports, expulsion hearings, things like that would be examples of documents that should not go through AI, aside from the confidentiality aspect. The specific incident mistranslated or misconstrued may cause a student unnecessary problems. So we're thinking about, you know, the effect of maybe something that wasn't supervised or should not have been used in a particular case, having downstream effects on someone. And in our case, we're talking about children and families, and that can be pretty drastic, the effects on them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think the higher the consequence, the more pause you should have in using these tools as well. So yeah, that's a great point.
But again,
that's a good rubric to use for sure.
Right. Again, I would
Stefan?
like I would like to use to add some nuance to this. So again, we need to differentiate very clearly between the scenario where you use machine translation, nothing else, and there is no supervision, no reviewer, right? This is one thing. And the other thing is when there is human in the loop in any role, reviewer, post-editor, whatever it is. And when you're comparing the letter with what we used to call human translation, I don't think there is much difference left in our today's world. So you're saying that it can be misconstrued, mistranslated by, it means it basically it says that you don't trust your post editors, right? To find these mistakes, to correct them. So your post editing process is not robust, reliable enough. That this is what it tells me. Not that machine translation can be used in these scenarios because of some inherent deficiencies, right? So it's also a very important distinction.
Well, I'll say though. Go ahead, Marifer.
Sorry. I think that in many cases, people will be thinking machine translation as a raw product and keep forgetting that there will be, I mean, in the ideal world, right? Post editors. I know some people that think that they can just share it as it is. I will also say that in some cases that misconstruction could be related to the obscurity of the source text. We were talking about the importance of writing some of this documentation in plain language, and that is definitely important. So whenever I will receive a document and all the translators started flagging that it wasn't clear, I will go look at the document, and then sure enough, it was super obscure. And we needed to go back to the source and just say, hey, like, what do you really mean when you say this? Do you mean A, B, or C? Because depending on that is how we're going to translate, and it will mean something different.
Yeah, perfect point. Yeah, source text is also super important, especially in machine translation applications. Yeah, the better it is, the better the outcome. So it's always like that. Yeah.
Okay. And Stefan, go ahead, Kleber.
Yeah, I was just going to add is for us not to lose focus on the fact that here in this room we strive for the ideal. We want to plan. We have post editors. We understand that we have the resources. We know what the qualifications are. But in the school, in any given moment, someone's just pressing a button and they think they're done. So there is no post editing. And so then I think the guidance we want to give schools is what to use for when and when not to use for what, because in their mind, there's no such thing as a human element in that process. And that's the danger. of using these tools in an uncontrolled environment, which is thousands of schools in our country, and millions of staff members who are just pressing a button because they want to communicate with that family at that particular moment, and don't understand. It goes back to my initial comment of educating folks. It's going to take, that's the biggest challenge, is trying to educate every single staff member at every single school and every single big city or small city what this work is about and how to do it, right? They're living in environments, they're working in environments where things are going 1,000 miles per hour, and the last thing they need to worry about is whether or not this thing looks like Arabic or not. Just sending the message out, and that's the danger, right?
Also, I will always say, like, that was one of the biggest frustrations for me, when I will have, like a chief coming and saying, well, when I was in X other state, I will just press the button and send it. And I will say, yes, I understand that, but we're trying to really give meaningful access to families. It's a letter. 1 or 2 pages doesn't take more than 1 or 2 hours to translate, right? And also, if you are brief and write clearer, this will take less time. Like, sometimes the time that it takes is because you write very obscurely. And those are things that you need to be able to have those conversations, right? Like, if what the source person is writing does not make sense, the person needs to know it, because chances are that some people that may not have their specific level of education may not understand as well. So we need clarity for all. It's just happened that during the process of translation, we're able to point it out. And yes, again, it goes back to having that robust relationship with the district, so that everybody will trust that they need to come to you, and or you can have clear guidance on when to use whatever is the application that they are using to send a quick message. Maybe the message is, make sure to send the homework tomorrow. So sure, that can be run by machine translation without consequences, almost in any language. But the bigger the message gets, then is when you get into these lacks of clarity.
Thank you. That's a really good point, by the way, too. As somebody who works with interpretation and translation, I'm like, I don't think you even know what you were trying to say. Like, it just seemed like you were just kind of wandering there a little bit. I did want to hit this one question, though, before we wrap up. Someone asked, I like the discussion of protecting student identity. Healthcare already has PMI. Does education have a similar list which can be or has been codified so that it can be taught and normalized during parent-teacher-child meetings? So maybe like a quick reference sheet, like, hey, these are your rights, your privacy rights, patient. So like in healthcare, we have patient rights and responsibilities that we are required to give out, and it outlines their basic rights and what we have to keep private and that kind of thing. Is there something like that in the educational field that parents can be given, like a brochure or something like that in their language that explains the rights that they are afforded to?
Well, my previous work, I created a toolkit for parent-teacher conferences that may hit in some of those instances, but it's not about that. What I want to say is really the teacher-parent conferences, in many cases, do not last more than 20 minutes or 15 minutes. So you really don't have time to go through those things, because parents may come with more specific questions they want to hear about their kids, or they are coming for those 15 minutes to hear from 5 or 6 kids that they may have. So it's a disconnect in there, and it happens very quickly. In some places, it's like a week-long event. In some places, it's just 2 or 3 days. It's very taxing on the language access program, because we have to have, I don't know, however many thousands of interpreters coming and going. I think that the pandemic helped we can now bring video remote interpreters and other supports from the distance that can help with that. I don't think there is enough time for going through all those things. I think that those are things that need to start happening, and I had encourage others to start happening at parent nights, which is like a month before so that parents know, but it's difficult to establish that.
Okay. Kleber, did you want to add quickly
Yeah.
before we wrap?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's somewhat challenging in the educational setting. I think a lot of school systems may imply or have documentation on this topic at the point of student registration or enrollment. You register your child, you fill out a mountain of paperwork, and maybe one of those forms in there says, we'll protect your data. But what happens after registration? 2 years from now, your child has an IEP. Every year you have a parent-teacher conference. There's these multiple means of interactions with families, whether it be in person, virtual, in documentation. Those are the pieces that perhaps get lost in the protection of that data. And then add to that the translation and then the tools that are being used and data and PII. It just exponentially gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that I don't think that whatever waiver was signed at the point of registration may or may not cover all those future interactions.
And that's an excellent point. So another caveat for everyone watching is things for us to keep in mind. And I'm sure we've just added more questions for everyone who's watching. But that's good. Questions are meant to be answered and problems to be solved. So I encourage everyone to do their research, work within your system, and try to apply some of these practices we've mentioned and these caveats that were mentioned within your own system. I would like to thank the panelists for their time and insight. Marifer and Kleber and Stefan, we really appreciate all your hard work in supporting language access for everyone involved in education and in other fields as well. And I also want to thank everyone in attendance for today as well. So that concludes our roundtable. I don't believe we have enough time to do the survey, but they may follow up later to anticipate what you guys thought of the today's roundtable session. So thank you guys for coming, and thank you again to our panelists.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.